Hi, this is Dan, and welcome to the ongoing melodrama about Paramount and whether or not it will be sold. Well, it looks like that question has been answered. Paramount indeed is going to be merging with Skydance. The Redstones are going to be paid a premium of 1.75 billion for their shares in National Amusements, which controlled a lot of the Paramount stock. Further, $4.5 billion is going to go to the current Class B and Class A shareholders. This is good news for them because under the previous arrangement, they weren't really getting much, and therefore there was fear of a shareholder strike against the company, as well as a potential to derail the merger. This represents, as of right now, almost a 45% premium on top of what their current Paramount shares are worth, which was roughly $10 prior to the open of the stock market this morning, at which time it jumped to 12, because everyone now sees that this is a very likely thing to happen. Further and finally, and the really good news is that $1.5 billion will be going towards creation of content and making things in the company more stable. Why this is good news? Because for the first time, we have people who have a lot of creative acumen on their side. Plus, it takes out the Redstone family, who had for probably at least the past 2 decades, if not ever since they bought the company in 1987, treated it like their own personal piggy bank. For some reason, the stockholders didn't complain. Well, that was because Paramount kept having reasonable hits and reasonably solid franchises. But that had all changed between 2019 and now, when the company lost approximately $17 billion in net asset value. Even then, we're looking at Paramount as seeming like a fire sale, given that MGM, which really didn't have much going for it either, other than an ability to leverage its name, as well as having a really, really good office staff, which understood how to buy assets for the right price. That's the real reason Amazon had bought MGM, because Amazon had shown itself to be completely at sea with how much should be spent on what and with who. So Paramount was indeed in very grave danger of becoming a mini major. This at least gives it an opportunity for survival. How did we know that Paramount was in a really desperate state? Well, first of all, it had sold almost all of its remaining real estate, with the exception of the studio lot itself. That began with a selling of Television City for almost $700 million. And that was a trophy Paramount property because, after all, that was where CBS was housed for decades. So that was a significant loss. That was followed by them selling the Radford Studios, which had a lot of their shows being shot there as well. Now that's probably going to be turned into some kind of housing or real estate development. Finally, they sold their New York office. Whenever a company sells their real estate that they had held for decades, you know they're in real trouble. It's likely that the lot itself will still be sold in order to pay off creditors. Paramount will probably do a leaseback the same way Disney did a leaseback of the 20th Century Fox property, because they didn't buy the land for that. Whereas in this case, they're getting the land and they're going to be selling it, most likely. Is that really a tragedy? I'm going to say it's more of a psychological tragedy than a real tragedy. Why? Because most of the buildings on the Paramount lot, outside of the iconographic gates, which I believe are protected as landmarks, and I don't think anyone, even a crass developer of the worst sort, would think that destroying the Paramount gates would be a good idea, because they're a good way to brand whatever the new property is. So I don't think the gates and that front area will be touched. Unfortunately, most of the other buildings, including the sound stages, weren't necessarily in great shape. I visited a couple of friends who were executives at the company, and I got to tell you, going into those old buildings, which were built in the 1920s, is not a trip down memory lane. It's a trip down memory nightmare that reminds you of exactly how inconvenient old school office space can be. Yes, it looks great from the outside in many instances, but when you're on the inside, it's impractical. You got tiny elevators, you got narrow stairways, you have doorways that aren't necessarily conducive to moving in today's furniture. So yes, the lot had a lot of practical problems because most of those offices were nothing special. They were Class B office space of the 1920s. So it's not as if they really had historic merit. The soundstage is something different, and we'll see how much of that is preserved. The back part of the lot had been up for redevelopment as far back as about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when Paramount was looking at a joint venture of perhaps using the back part of the lot for mixed use development, housing, retail, and all of that. And the real estate corrections of the past 20 years definitely took that more or less off the table, although it was still up for consideration every now and then. The person who looks likely to be running the new company is Jeff Shell. And you might remember Jeff Shell as the guy who ran NBC Universal for the better part of 2 decades, but was kicked out on a Me Too allegation with the same woman who had taken down Kevin Tsujihara at Warner Brothers. The question for a lot of fans remains is, what does this mean for Star Trek? What does this mean for Mission Impossible? What does this mean for Transformers? And what does this mean for Top Gun? Let's hope it means that all of them will have their franchises treated appropriately. I don't really think there's much of a question with Top Gun and Mission Impossible, although the recent Mission Impossible was somewhat disappointing. And I'm getting the sense that the second half of it, they're probably going to retool a bit to bring it more in line with Top Gun and less in line with, oh my God, the 60-year-old is doing these crazy stunts. I'm spend all my time worrying about him, which was kind of the problem with Mission Impossible because it didn't have the emotional resonance of Maverick. As far as Star Trek is concerned, I don't know what this means in terms of Kurtzman staying or going. I know that for a lot of the Trekkie fans, him going is probably a better idea, but it's going to really depend on the Skydance people. And I've got to say that Skydance has enough of a solid brain trust and enough of a know-how in the creative end of movie and television making to where they can probably have at least a sporting chance of turning this ship around. Now, what are the real deal differences between this and the one that caused Shari Redstone last time to walk away at the 11th hour? I think what it ultimately boiled down to was fear of shareholder revolt. Remember, 4 of the board members quit their positions after Shari Redstone pulled it because they felt that it was now hopeless. But she'd pulled it because she was afraid that there would be shareholders would complain that they had been frozen out of any kind of bounty, while the Redstones, who had quite possibly mismanaged the company into a horrible deficit, were going to walk away with the prize. The fact that the stock is giving them a 48% for the B shares and a 20-something percent for the A shares should go a long way to avoid that happening. To add an extra level of insurance for the next 45 days, I don't know what day it starts, but for a 45-day period, there will still be an open opportunity for those who can match or better the Skydance offer. And I don't think that'll happen because most of the people who were looking to invest with Paramount were buying it for its parts and were going to absolutely take it apart and sell its assets to the highest bidders. So I do think that this will remain the top of the offers. but other people who were interested is Barry Diller, who ran CBS for a while, and Edgar Bronfman, who you might recall used to be the head of Vivendi and had almost destroyed the family fortune when he bought MCA Universal prior to General Electric, which was prior to Comcast buying it. So the fact that he's wanting to get back into the entertainment industry after he had been burned that badly, gotta hand it to people for keeping it up, for giving it that old college try again. I am glad that we're not going to see another studio absolutely crumble into mini major status. I'm glad that we have people who are interested in keeping Paramount at least as an entity alive for now in an attempt to bring it back, if not to its former glory, then at least to a cash positive industry. So maybe Hollywood is starting to get out of the doldrums it's been in for the past couple of years. And I'm going to hope that with Inside Out 2, with the opening of the Despicable Me movie, uh, the summer could still turn out to be quite good. But let's stay tuned and see for sure.